By the middle years of the Second World War, Nazi Germany found itself trapped in a war it could no longer easily control. What had begun as a series of rapid, overwhelming victories had slowed into a grinding conflict of attrition. Allied bombing raids struck deep into German cities. Industrial output came under constant pressure, and the strategic balance steadily shifted. As fronts collapsed and resources dwindled, Germany's leadership turned increasingly toward a single hope: technology. If conventional forces could no longer guarantee victory, perhaps revolutionary weapons could. Inside Germany's military and scientific establishments, an intense race was underway. Engineers, physicists, and designers were pushed to create weapons that could bypass Allied superiority in numbers and production. These were not incremental improvements, but radical departures from existing warfare, machines and systems that promised speed, range, and destructive power far beyond anything then in service. Some projects were driven by genuine innovation, others by desperation, but all shared a common goal: to reverse the course of the war before it was too late. Secrecy became absolute. Entire facilities were hidden underground, shielded from Allied bombers. Programs were compartmentalized so that even senior officers often understood only fragments of what was being developed. Forced labor was used to accelerate construction, while resources were diverted from conventional weapons to fuel experimental designs. The regime believed that a single technological breakthrough could compensate for failing fronts and collapsing alliances. Among these projects were weapons that would redefine warfare in the decades to come. Early guided missiles, jet-powered aircraft, advanced submarines, and long-range rockets moved from theory to reality at astonishing speed. Some were tested in combat, others remained unfinished, halted by lack of time rather than lack of potential. While many arrived too late to change the outcome of the war, their existence revealed how close Germany came to reshaping the battlefield entirely. This episode explores the secret Nazi weapons developed in the final years of the Third Reich, what they were designed to do, how close they came to altering history, and why even the most advanced technology could not save a regime already doomed by its own ambitions. As the war entered its final phase, innovation and collapse advanced side by side, setting the stage for a technological legacy that would outlive the Reich itself. As the war intensified, Germany's most ambitious weapons programs were pushed far from public view. Vast underground complexes were carved into mountainsides, abandoned mines were repurposed into factories, and remote testing grounds appeared on maps only under false names. These locations were chosen not for convenience, but for survival. Allied air superiority made open production increasingly impossible. To protect their most valuable projects, German planners moved innovation underground, literally and figuratively. Inside these hidden facilities, work continued under extreme pressure. Engineers were given impossible deadlines. Designs were revised even as prototypes were already being built. Failures were tolerated only briefly, while success was demanded immediately. Many of these projects bypassed traditional testing phases altogether, moving directly from experimental theory to battlefield deployment. In a regime obsessed with control and results, caution was considered a luxury Germany could no longer afford. Among the earliest breakthroughs were advances in rocketry. Long-range weapons capable of striking cities hundreds of kilometers away promised a way to bypass Allied defenses entirely. Unlike bombers, these weapons could not be intercepted once launched. Their psychological impact alone was expected to be devastating, spreading fear far beyond the front lines. For German leadership, such weapons represented a new kind of warfare, one in which distance and air superiority no longer guaranteed safety. At the same time, German aircraft designers pursued radical concepts that challenged everything pilots and tacticians thought they knew. Jet propulsion, swept wings, and unconventional airframes moved from experimental drawings into operational prototypes. These aircraft promised speed and altitude beyond the reach of Allied fighters. In theory, they could dominate the skies. In reality, they faced shortages of fuel, trained pilots, and time, resources Germany no longer possessed in abundance. Naval innovation followed a similar path. Submarine designers sought to overcome Allied anti-submarine tactics by creating vessels capable of remaining submerged longer, moving faster underwater, and striking without warning. These designs hinted at a future where traditional surface fleets would be increasingly vulnerable. Had they entered service earlier and in greater numbers, the Battle of the Atlantic might have taken a very different course. What unified all these programs was urgency. Germany was no longer building weapons to win a long war. It was building weapons to force a sudden reversal. Each secret project carried the hope of a decisive moment, a technological shock that could break Allied momentum. But secrecy, speed, and desperation came at a cost. Coordination suffered, resources were stretched thin, and many projects advanced in isolation, never fully integrated into a coherent strategy. The weapons born in the shadows represented both extraordinary ingenuity and fatal miscalculation. They demonstrated how close Germany came to reshaping modern warfare, and how innovation alone could not compensate for strategic overreach and moral collapse. Among all of Nazi Germany's secret weapons, none captured the imagination or fear of the world like the so-called Vergeltungswaffen, the weapons of vengeance. Designed to strike directly at civilian populations far beyond the front lines, these weapons represented a radical shift in warfare. They were not meant to defeat enemy armies in the field. They were meant to break morale, undermine confidence, and force political collapse through terror delivered from the sky. The first of these weapons, the V-1 flying bomb, was essentially an early cruise missile. Powered by a pulse jet engine, it could travel hundreds of kilometers before crashing into its target with a devastating explosion. Its distinctive engine noise became infamous. As long as the sound continued, civilians knew the weapon was still airborne. When it stopped, impact was only seconds away. For those living under its flight path, the V-1 turned weighting itself into a form of psychological torture. More advanced and far more revolutionary was the V-2 rocket. It was the world's first long-range ballistic missile, traveling faster than the speed of sound and striking without warning. Unlike bombers or flying bombs, it could not be intercepted. There were no sirens, no defenses, no opportunity to take cover. The explosion came first. Only afterward did people hear the sound. In technological terms, the V-2 represented a leap decades ahead of its time. It was a weapon born not of aviation, but of spaceflight. Behind the V-2 stood an enormous industrial and scientific effort. Rockets were assembled in underground factories using forced labor under brutal conditions. Engineers refined guidance systems, propulsion, and fuel mixtures at a pace unmatched anywhere else in the world. From a purely technical standpoint, the achievement was extraordinary. Germany had created a weapon that redefined the limits of range, speed, and altitude. In doing so, it laid the foundations for post-war missile and space programs across the globe. Yet, despite their sophistication, the V-weapons failed to achieve their strategic purpose. Thousands were launched against cities such as London and Antwerp, causing destruction and loss of life, but they did not alter the course of the war. Resources poured into rocket production could not compensate for collapsing fronts, shrinking armies, and overwhelming Allied industrial power. The weapons arrived too late, in too few numbers, and without a broader strategy to exploit their impact. The true legacy of the V-weapons lay not in what they accomplished during the war, but in what they revealed about the future. They demonstrated that warfare no longer required pilots, proximity, or even visibility. Distance had been defeated. Speed had become decisive. The battlefield had expanded to include entire cities, delivered by machines that operated beyond human reaction. In that sense, the V-weapons did not change the outcome of World War II, but they permanently changed the nature of war itself. While the V-weapons terrorized cities, another revolutionary project was taking shape in the skies, one that threatened to overturn Allied air superiority itself. The Messerschmitt Me-262 was the world's first operational jet fighter, a machine so advanced that it seemed to belong to a different era. Capable of speeds far beyond any piston-engine aircraft, it could outrun, outclimb, and outgun the fighters escorting Allied bombers. For pilots who encountered it in combat, the Me-262 appeared and vanished with terrifying speed, striking before defenders could react. Technologically, the aircraft represented a clean break from the past. Its twin jet engines eliminated the limitations of propellers, allowing sustained high-speed flight at altitudes where traditional fighters struggled. Armed with heavy cannons, the Me-262 could destroy a bomber with a single short burst. In theory, small numbers of these jets could devastate entire bomber formations, crippling the Allied strategic bombing campaign that was steadily dismantling Germany's industrial base. Yet the promise of the Me-262 was undermined by timing, politics, and scarcity. Germany lacked the resources to produce the aircraft in sufficient numbers, and the jet engines themselves were fragile, plagued by short lifespans and maintenance issues. Trained pilots were increasingly rare, fuel supplies were critically low, and airfields were under constant attack. Each advanced jet required a support system that Germany, by this stage of the war, could no longer reliably provide. Strategic missteps further delayed its impact. Leadership debates over the aircraft's role, fighter or bomber, resulted in design changes and production delays at the worst possible moment. Time lost to indecision proved fatal. By the time Me-262 units entered combat in meaningful numbers, Allied forces had already adapted, attacking jet airfields during takeoff and landing, when the aircraft were most vulnerable. Despite these limitations, the Me-262 left a lasting impression. Allied pilots recognized instantly that they were facing a weapon from the future. Post-war air forces studied, captured examples in detail, and jet propulsion quickly became the standard for military aviation worldwide. The Me-262 did not save Germany, but it ensured that the age of propeller-driven air combat was coming to an end. The jet fighter embodied the central paradox of Nazi Germany's secret weapons program. Extraordinary innovation existed alongside strategic collapse. The technology worked, but it arrived in a world that Germany had already lost the ability to control. The Me-262 proved that advanced weapons could change how wars were fought. but not necessarily who would win them. Beneath the surface of the Atlantic, Germany pursued another technological gamble, one aimed at restoring dominance in a naval war it was rapidly losing. By 1943, Allied advances in radar, sonar, and coordinated convoy tactics had turned the once feared U-boat fleet into a hunted force. Losses mounted, and the Battle of the Atlantic began to tilt decisively in the Allies' favor. In response, German naval engineers sought to reinvent submarine warfare itself. The result was the Type 21 submarine, a vessel unlike anything that had come before it. Unlike earlier submarines, which were essentially surface ships that could submerge briefly, the Type 21 was designed to operate primarily underwater. Its streamlined hull, powerful batteries, and advanced electric propulsion allowed it to remain submerged for days and travel faster beneath the surface than many escorts could manage above it. For the first time, submarines could evade detection not by hiding, but by outrunning their hunters. Technologically, the Type 21 represented a revolution. Automated systems reduced crew workload, advanced sonar improved target detection, and rapid torpedo reloading systems allowed sustained attacks without surfacing. In theory, these submarines could slip through Allied patrols, strike convoys with devastating precision, and disappear before countermeasures could be deployed. Had they entered service in large numbers earlier, the flow of men and material across the Atlantic might have been seriously disrupted. But once again, time proved decisive. Production delays, bombing of shipyards, and shortages of skilled labor slowed deployment. Many Type 21 submarines were completed only weeks or even days before Germany's surrender. Crews received minimal training, and few boats ever conducted combat patrols. The concept was sound. The execution came too late. Despite their limited wartime use, the influence of the Type 21 was profound. Allied navies immediately recognized its potential and incorporated its design principles into post-war submarine fleets. Cold War submarines, on both sides, would owe much of their basic form to this German design. The future of naval warfare had surfaced briefly, only to vanish beneath the tide of defeat. The Type 21 underscored a recurring theme of Germany's secret weapons program. Innovation flourished, but strategic reality lagged behind. Technology alone could not compensate for lost time, broken supply chains, and an enemy that had already adapted. Silent and unseen, these submarines symbolized both what might have been and why it never came to pass. As conventional aircraft reached the limits of their design, German engineers began experimenting with shapes that looked nothing like the planes filling Allied airfields. Among the most radical concepts was the flying wing, an aircraft with no traditional fuselage or tail, designed to reduce drag and increase speed. These designs promised performance far beyond existing fighters and bombers, and they reflected a willingness to abandon established rules in pursuit of decisive advantage. The most famous of these projects was the Horten HO-229, a jet-powered flying wing that combined advanced aerodynamics with stealth-like characteristics decades ahead of its time. Its smooth, blended shape reduced radar visibility, though this was not fully understood in wartime terms. To its designers, the goal was speed, range, and efficiency. If successful, such an aircraft could penetrate Allied defenses, strike targets deep behind the front lines, and escape interception almost effortlessly. Test flights revealed both the promise and the danger of such innovation. The aircraft was fast and agile, but difficult to control. Pilots faced unfamiliar handling characteristics, and minor errors could be fatal. Materials shortages forced compromises, with wood replacing metal in some sections. The pressures of war left little room for refinement. Prototypes were rushed forward even as engineers struggled to solve stability and control problems that would normally take years to perfect. At the same time, other unconventional projects explored vertical takeoff, rocket-assisted interceptors, and hybrid propulsion systems. These aircraft were designed to counter Allied bombers with speed and surprise, climbing rapidly to altitude before fuel ran out. Some reached astonishing speeds in short bursts, but their operational usefulness was limited. They were dangerous to fly, consumed scarce resources, and offered little margin for error. Despite their shortcomings, these radical designs revealed how far German aviation had pushed beyond traditional thinking. They foreshadowed post-war developments in stealth technology, delta wings, and blended airframes. Engineers in the United States and the Soviet Union would later study captured prototypes, recognizing ideas that would not fully mature until decades later. Once again, the pattern repeated. The technology pointed toward the future, but the war belonged to the present. Radical aircraft designs could not compensate for fuel shortages, pilot losses, and crumbling infrastructure. The flying wings remained experimental visions, glimpses of what air combat might become, rather than tools that could change the outcome of World War II. Not all of Germany's secret weapons ever reached the stage of prototypes or battlefield testing. As the war situation deteriorated, an increasing number of projects existed only on paper, ambitious concepts born from desperation and unrestrained imagination. Engineers were encouraged to think without limits, to design systems that promised absolute superiority if only time, resources, and stability could be restored. In reality, these designs reflected how far removed planning had become from Germany's actual capacity to fight. Among these concepts were colossal armored vehicles intended to dominate land warfare through sheer size and firepower. Designs envisioned machines so heavily armored that no existing weapon could penetrate them, armed with naval-scale guns capable of obliterating enemy positions from miles away. On paper, such vehicles appeared unstoppable. In practice, they were impossible to manufacture, transport, or supply. Fuel consumption alone would have rendered them immobile in a country already facing severe shortages. Other proposals focused on extreme forms of air defense. Some designs imagined space-reaching rockets capable of striking bombers at unprecedented altitudes, while others proposed automated gun systems guided by early forms of electronic control. These ideas hinted at future missile defense and automated warfare, but wartime technology was simply not ready to support them. Guidance systems lacked precision, electronics were fragile, and production capabilities were overstretched. What remained were blueprints, impressive, detailed, and ultimately unusable. Perhaps most revealing were plans that blended science with ideology. Certain projects were driven less by practical necessity than by the belief that technological miracles could reverse destiny itself. This mindset encouraged increasingly unrealistic expectations, diverting attention and resources away from weapons that could actually be fielded. Innovation became detached from strategy, drifting into a realm where possibility replaced feasibility. Despite never being built, these designs mattered. They demonstrated how technological ambition can expand unchecked under extreme pressure. They also provided a glimpse into the future of warfare, where automation, long-range precision, and overwhelming firepower would eventually become reality. though not in the form Germany imagined. The weapons that never left the drawing board revealed a critical truth. Innovation, without time, resources, and strategic clarity, is not power. It is illusion. In the final years of the war, Germany produced ideas faster than it could produce weapons, leaving behind a legacy of unrealized concepts that spoke more about desperation than dominance. As Germany's secret weapons programs multiplied, a fundamental problem became impossible to ignore. There was no unified strategy guiding them. Projects competed for resources, attention, and political favor, often advancing in parallel without coordination. Rocket engineers, aircraft designers, naval architects, and weapons developers worked toward radically different visions of victory, each convinced that their breakthrough could be decisive. What was missing was a coherent plan to integrate these technologies into a realistic military doctrine. This fragmentation was not accidental. It reflected the chaotic structure of decision-making within the regime itself. Rivalries between institutions, shifting priorities from leadership, and constant interference from political figures created an environment where long-term planning was almost impossible. Weapons were ordered, redesigned, delayed, and redirected based on ideology, personal influence, or sudden shifts in optimism. Technical excellence existed, but it was trapped inside a system incapable of using it effectively. Even when advanced weapons reached operational status, they often arrived without the infrastructure needed to support them. Jet aircraft lacked fuel and trained pilots. Submarines lacked secure bases and coordinated command structures. Rockets lacked targeting accuracy and strategic follow-up. Each innovation demanded a stable industrial base, reliable logistics, and time to mature, none of which Germany possessed by the final years of the war. The Allies, by contrast, focused on coordination and scale. Their weapons were not always more advanced, but they were deployed in overwhelming numbers, supported by standardized training and logistics. Germany's secret weapons highlighted a painful reality. Technological superiority in isolated areas cannot overcome systemic weakness. War is not won by inventions alone, but by the ability to sustain and integrate them under pressure. This imbalance grew more pronounced as the war progressed. Each failed miracle weapon increased the reliance on the next, untested idea. Expectations became detached from reality, and innovation turned into a substitute for strategy. Instead of solving problems, new weapons often created additional ones, drawing resources away from existing forces while offering no immediate return. In the end, Germany's secret weapons program revealed a paradox at the heart of modern warfare. Advanced technology can expand possibilities, but without strategic clarity, it amplifies failure. Innovation without coordination does not change the course of war. It accelerates collapse. The secret weapons did not fail because they were flawed ideas. They failed because they were asked to do what no technology alone can ever do: save a war that had already been lost. By the final years of the war, one of Germany's greatest disadvantages was no longer technological, it was adaptive speed. While German engineers raced to perfect revolutionary weapons, the Allies proved remarkably efficient at learning, countering, and neutralizing new threats. Each surprise was short-lived. Every breakthrough triggered a rapid response. The balance no longer favored innovation alone, but the ability to absorb shock and adapt faster than the enemy. When jet fighters appeared, Allied pilots adjusted tactics, attacking during takeoff and landing. When V weapons struck cities, Intelligence services traced launch sites and bombed them relentlessly. When advanced submarines were detected, escort doctrines evolved, combining air patrols, improved sonar, and coordinated strikes. Germany introduced weapons that forced change, but the Allies were able to change faster and at scale. This adaptability was rooted in industrial capacity and organizational discipline. Allied command structures encouraged feedback from the battlefield, allowing tactics to evolve continuously. New countermeasures were deployed in months rather than years. Training programs adjusted. Production lines shifted. Germany, by contrast, struggled to replace losses, retrain personnel, and standardize responses. Each innovation became a temporary advantage rather than a decisive one. Intelligence played a critical role. Code breaking, reconnaissance, and human intelligence reduced the secrecy that Germany relied upon. Facilities thought to be hidden were identified. Production centers were targeted. Supply lines were disrupted. Secret weapons were rarely as secret as their designers hoped. By the time many systems reached operational status, the Allies already understood their strengths and their weaknesses. This dynamic exposed a harsh truth. Revolutionary weapons are most effective when deployed unexpectedly and supported by a system capable of exploiting their impact. Germany achieved surprise repeatedly, but lacked the means to sustain it. The Allies turned reaction into a weapon of their own, transforming German innovation into an opportunity to refine their own strategies. By 1945, the gap was undeniable. Germany could still astonish the world with new machines, but astonishment no longer translated into advantage. The war had become a contest not of ideas, but of systems, and in that contest, adaptability proved more powerful than invention. The secret weapons changed the shape of warfare, but they could no longer change its outcome. Behind every secret weapon lay a hidden cost, one that extended far beyond materials and machinery. As Germany poured resources into experimental projects, the strain on its economy and population intensified. Skilled labor was diverted from conventional production. Factories were retooled repeatedly to accommodate changing designs. Supply chains, already weakened by bombing and shortages, were stretched to their breaking point. The pursuit of technological miracles came at the expense of weapons and equipment urgently needed on active fronts. The human cost was even greater. Many secret weapons facilities relied heavily on forced labor, with workers operating under brutal conditions and extreme time pressure. Construction and assembly took place in underground complexes where safety was minimal and survival uncertain. These environments accelerated production in the short term, but at a devastating moral and human price. The weapons that emerged from these facilities carried with them an invisible legacy of suffering that could not be separated from their technological achievements. Obsessive focus on revolutionary weapons also distorted decision-making. Leaders placed disproportionate faith in projects that promised dramatic results, while neglecting incremental improvements that might have strengthened existing forces. Each delay or failure was met not with reassessment, but with renewed hope that the next innovation would succeed. This mindset encouraged risk-taking without accountability, allowing unrealistic expectations to persist long after circumstances had changed. As the war situation deteriorated, secret weapons became symbols rather than solutions. They represented belief in inevitability, that victory could still be achieved through ingenuity alone. This belief delayed necessary strategic adjustments and fostered denial. Instead of confronting defeat, leadership doubled down on experimentation, mistaking possibility for probability. The cost of obsession was cumulative. Resources wasted could not be recovered. Time lost could not be replaced. By the time some weapons reached operational status, Germany lacked the trained crews, fuel, and infrastructure needed to use them effectively. The weapons existed, but the system required to sustain them had already collapsed. In the end, the secret weapons program revealed how innovation, when driven by desperation rather than strategy, can accelerate decline. Technology became a distraction from reality, a final gamble taken when rational options had vanished. The cost was measured not only in failure, but in the lives and capacity consumed by a pursuit that could no longer alter the outcome of the war. By the final phase of the war, the idea of the Wunderwaffe, the wonder weapon, had taken on a life of its own. It was no longer simply a technical goal, but a psychological refuge. Faced with collapsing fronts and overwhelming Allied power, German leadership and propaganda increasingly framed advanced weapons as inevitable game changers. The narrative suggested that defeat was temporary, that salvation was imminent, and that science itself would deliver victory at the last moment. This belief distorted reality at every level. Military planning began to revolve around weapons that were not yet operational, while existing forces were left to fight with diminishing support. Soldiers were told that jets, rockets, or new submarines would soon turn the tide. Civilians were encouraged to endure hardship with the promise that secret technologies would soon force the enemy to retreat. In practice, these promises delayed difficult decisions and prolonged suffering without delivering results. The illusion was reinforced by genuine technological success. Many of these weapons did work. They flew, launched, submerged, and struck as designed. But isolated success was mistaken for strategic transformation. Leadership failed to recognize that even revolutionary weapons require time, numbers, coordination, and stability to achieve decisive effect. None of these conditions existed anymore. Propaganda amplified the myth, presenting prototypes as mass-produced systems and tests as battlefield victories. The gap between image and reality widened. Weapons that existed in dozens were portrayed as if they existed in thousands. Experimental successes were presented as operational readiness. This disconnect created expectations that technology could no longer meet. As the illusion deepened, accountability disappeared. Failures were blamed on sabotage, lack of faith, or insufficient commitment rather than flawed assumptions. Engineers were pressured to promise more than physics and logistics could deliver. Science was asked to replace strategy, and imagination was substituted for planning. The Wunderwaffe mindset revealed one of the most dangerous aspects of modern warfare, the temptation to believe that technology alone can resolve fundamentally political, economic, and moral failures. In Germany's final months, the belief in miracle weapons did not prevent defeat, it obscured it, delaying recognition of reality until collapse became unavoidable. As the myth of secret weapons persisted, the reality of the war was being decided far from underground laboratories and test ranges. On the ground, Allied armies advanced relentlessly from both west and east. In the air, bombing campaigns systematically dismantled Germany's remaining industrial capacity. At sea, supply routes were cut and rebuilt faster than Germany could respond. The outcome of the war was shaped not by isolated breakthroughs, but by logistics, coordination, and overwhelming material superiority. Allied strategy emphasized reliability over revolution. Tanks, aircraft, ships, and artillery were produced in vast numbers, standardized for ease of maintenance and rapid deployment. Training systems ensured a constant flow of personnel capable of operating complex equipment effectively. Losses were absorbed and replaced. While Germany pursued perfection in small quantities, the Allies pursued adequacy at scale, and scale proved decisive. This contrast exposed a fundamental truth about modern warfare. Wars are won not by the most advanced individual weapon, but by the ability to sustain combat over time. Fuel, spare parts, trained crews, and secure supply lines mattered as much as firepower. Germany's secret weapons demanded precisely what it lacked: stability, time, and industrial depth. Each new system added complexity to an already strained system. By 1945, even successful deployments of advanced weapons could no longer influence the strategic picture. Jet fighters could shoot down bombers, but not faster than new bombers were built. Rockets could devastate cities, but not stop armies. Advanced submarines could sink ships, but not faster than shipyards could replace them. The war had become a contest of systems, and Germany's system was collapsing. The realization came too late. While secret weapons captured attention and imagination, the decisive factors of the war, manpower, production, coordination, and adaptability, continued to operate in the background. These were less dramatic, less visible, but ultimately unstoppable. Technology promised sudden reversal. Reality delivered gradual, irreversible defeat. In the end, the secret weapons did not fail because they lacked brilliance. They failed because the war was never going to be decided in laboratories alone. Victory had already been determined elsewhere, by the combined weight of economies, alliances, and strategic coherence that no single invention could overcome. When the Third Reich collapsed, its secret weapons programs did not vanish with it. Instead, they became prizes in a new global competition. As Allied forces advanced into Germany, special units raced to secure laboratories, factories, blueprints, and personnel before they could be destroyed or captured by rival powers. What had been developed in secrecy and desperation now became the foundation for post-war military and scientific advancement. Engineers and scientists who had worked on rockets, jets, submarines, and advanced weapons were interrogated, recruited, and relocated. Their knowledge was stripped of ideology and absorbed into new national programs. Technologies once intended to prolong a doomed war were repurposed to shape the future balance of power. Missile research accelerated. Jet aviation became standard. Submarine design entered a new era. The war ended, but the technological race did not. It simply changed hands. This transfer of knowledge revealed a striking irony. The most successful outcome of Germany's secret weapons program was not battlefield impact, but its contribution to the post-war world. Ideas that had failed to save the regime now flourished under systems with greater resources, coordination, and stability. The weapons that arrived too late for Germany arrived at exactly the right moment for others. At the same time, this legacy raised uncomfortable questions. Technologies developed under a criminal regime became integral to new national defense strategies. Innovation was separated from its origins, treated as neutral or inevitable. The moral cost of how that knowledge was produced, often through coercion and suffering, was rarely confronted directly. Progress moved forward, carrying its shadows with it. The victors understood that future wars would be shaped by speed, range, and precision. Lessons learned from Germany's secret weapons programs influenced doctrines for decades to come. The Cold War arms race did not emerge from nothing. It was built in part upon foundations laid in the final desperate years of World War II. In this sense, Germany's secret weapons achieved a kind of delayed success. They did not change the outcome of the war they were designed to win, but they changed the nature of the wars that followed. The legacy of innovation outlived the ideology that created it, proving that technology, once unleashed, rarely belongs to history alone. With distance from the battlefield, the true meaning of Germany's secret weapons became clearer. They were not evidence of inevitable technological dominance, but case studies in how innovation can fail when divorced from strategy, ethics, and reality. Post-war analysts studying these programs reached a sobering conclusion. Advanced weapons are multipliers, not saviors. They amplify existing strengths, but they also amplify weaknesses. Germany's experience demonstrated that timing is decisive. Weapons introduced too late, no matter how advanced, cannot compensate for years of attrition and strategic miscalculation. It also showed that complexity carries risk. Highly sophisticated systems demand training, logistics, and stability. In wartime collapse, simplicity and reliability often outperform brilliance. The Allies did not always possess superior technology, but they possessed systems capable of sustaining it. Another lesson lay in coordination. Secret weapons programs were scattered, competing, and frequently redundant. Innovation advanced in isolation, without integration into a broader operational vision. Modern militaries would later emphasize joint planning, interoperability, and doctrine, ensuring that new technology served strategy rather than the other way around. Germany's failure helped define what not to do. There was also a moral dimension that could not be ignored. Many of these technologies were developed under coercive conditions, relying on forced labor and secrecy enforced by terror. The human cost undermined the very efficiency these programs sought to achieve. Post-war military planners increasingly recognized that sustainable innovation depends not only on resources, but on legitimacy, consent, and institutional trust. These lessons echoed through the Cold War and beyond. Nations invested in research and development, but with an increasing emphasis on testing, integration, and long-term planning. The myth of the miracle weapon lost credibility among serious strategists. What replaced it was a more cautious understanding. Technology can shape wars, but it cannot redeem flawed decisions or collapsing systems. Germany's secret weapons thus became warnings as much as inspirations. They showed how close innovation can come to changing history, and how easily it can fail when burdened by unrealistic expectations. In their failure, they offered guidance to future generations, proving that the line between breakthrough and catastrophe is often drawn not by science, but by judgment. In the final reckoning, Nazi Germany's secret weapons revealed a fundamental truth about modern warfare. Technology alone cannot rescue a collapsing system. The rockets, jets, submarines, and experimental machines developed in secrecy were extraordinary by any technical measure. Some were decades ahead of their time, yet they emerged from a state already weakened by strategic overreach, economic strain, moral bankruptcy, and total war against the world. Innovation, no matter how advanced, could not reverse those realities. The belief that a single breakthrough could alter destiny proved to be an illusion. Each new weapon promised speed, surprise, and power, but none could replace alliances, manpower, logistics, and Legitimacy. The war was decided not by what might have been fielded, but by what could be produced, sustained, and coordinated at scale. Germany's secret weapons arrived in fragments, too few and too late, unable to compensate for the systemic failures that surrounded them. These projects also exposed the danger of confusing possibility with inevitability. Engineers proved what could be built under extreme pressure, but leaders mistook technical feasibility for strategic salvation. The result was a widening gap between expectation and reality. As the regime clung to visions of miracle weapons, it delayed confronting defeat, prolonging destruction without altering the outcome. Technology became a substitute for strategy, and hope replaced judgment. The legacy of these weapons extends far beyond World War II. They shaped the future of warfare, aviation, missiles, and submarines, influencing global military development for generations. Yet their original purpose, to save the Third Reich, failed completely. History remembers them not as instruments of victory, but as symbols of desperation and miscalculation. In the end, the secret Nazi weapons did not almost change the war because they were insufficiently advanced. They failed because wars are not won by inventions alone. They are won by systems, political, economic, military, and moral, that can endure pressure and adapt over time. Germany's final gamble demonstrated that when those systems collapse, even the most advanced weapons become powerless. Standing at the crossroads of innovation and failure, these secret weapons offer a lasting lesson. Technology can shape the future, but it cannot escape the consequences of the world that creates it. In World War II, ingenuity survived. The regime that relied on it did not.